Welcome back to Before the Day Ends. So we are in Book 3 of Matthew, and in the second half of Book 3. In chapter 18, Jesus is going to start talking about his disciples and the church, and how we relate to one another as his disciples. So this is a very, very important chapter as far as our relationship with each other. Now, one thing I want to say before we get started here is that we have to really credit the disciples for what's in the Gospels. There's a lot of times in these stories that they don't come off looking very good. So, for example, Peter tells the story that he walks on water, but then he doubts and sinks. We have the story of Jesus calling Peter Satan in here. We have the story of Gethsemane, where the disciples ran and abandoned Jesus. We have the story of Peter denying Jesus 3 times. We have these stories in the Gospels because the disciples decided to tell them. They didn't hide them away or say, hey, don't write that down because it makes me look bad. They told these stories because it wasn't about how they looked. It was about showing the power of Jesus, about how Jesus changed their lives. And they wanted to share that with us to give us hope and encouragement as we begin our journey as disciples as well. So again, we want to credit them for the work they did. Now, as we get to chapter 18, there's been a lot going on prior to this about Jesus talking about what it means to be a servant. That we're to be servants of Jesus. We are his followers. And many times he humbles them to show them that they are, and we are, in fact, servants. But then look at how chapter 18 opens. Verse 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" We have all the things to ask. They ask this. Who is going to be the greatest? You must be thinking, guys, are you not getting the program? Are you not understanding what he's trying to tell you here? But they tell us the story that they come to him and say, hey, who's going to be the best? Jesus answers like this. He called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." So he says, see this child here? This humble child, be like this. It's not about power and prestige and who's number one and who's the best servant. It's about being a servant. It's about humility. And so he kind of turns it on them, which we'd expect, of course, because this has been his message all along, that we are to be servants, humble servants. But then the story changes very quickly. In verse 6, it almost like this whole very simple message of humility and servanthood kind of takes a turn. In verse 6 it says this, "If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. Occasions for stumbling are bound to come, but woe to the one by whom the stumbling block comes." Now think about this story for a minute. What's the punishment? Well, the punishment for stumbling blocks is to have this millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea. Now, I'm going to show you a picture here of a stone they're talking about. It's these huge stones that were used to grind out olives to make olive oil. So it's an olive press. And these are huge, massive stones. And this was actually done. They tie these stones around someone's neck and throw them into the sea as a punishment. And it was for the worst of the worst people that got this kind of punishment. So think back to maybe watching a movie and there's the bad guy in the movie, and the bad guy always gets it worse than anybody else. Well, it's kind of like that. Now, there's also a principle in the Bible from Genesis on that the punishment fits the crime. So eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth was basically that law that said the punishment should fit the crime. You don't kill someone for stealing a loaf of bread, that the punishment should fit the crime. So if the punishment Jesus says here is to have a millstone tied around your neck and go swimming, what crime would fit that punishment? Well, it's going to be something pretty bad, obviously. So to get to that, let's ask another question. Who are the little ones? Jesus says, if you cause any of these little ones who believe in me to stumble. Okay, so it could be children, and that makes sense because he just finished talking about children. He just took a child and put it among them. So it kind of makes sense he's talking about children. It could be young believers, right? Little ones who believe in me, so they're young in the faith. And for Matthew's readers, it could be a warning to those who would cause other believers to stumble in this, quote, young church, right? So it could be any of those three. A child, it could be a young believer, or just any believer in Jesus. That, again, we are to be humble servants, and therefore little ones, like children, childlike followers. That's all of us. So maybe it's all of us if you cause another believer to stumble. So it's unclear. However, do you remember the story of the Good Samaritan? What's that story about? Well, remember that story, we have a man who's traveling, Jericho to Jerusalem, and he falls among thieves. And he's laying there, beaten and robbed, and along comes a priest who ignores him, walks by the other side. A Levite sees him, walks by the other side. So two religious leaders who should know better don't help him. But then this Samaritan, this outcast, nobody, kind of like lowest rung of society kind of person, he comes and takes care of the man. And then Jesus turns to his Jewish audience, who saw Samaritans as the enemy. He turns to the Jewish audience and he says, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the person who fell among thieves? And they say, well, the one who helped him. They can't even say Samaritan. They say the one who helped him. And Jesus says, that's who your neighbor is. Because the question that starts that story is to love your neighbor as yourself. And they ask, well, who's my neighbor? Now, why did they ask the question? Because they want to know who wasn't their neighbor. Who do I have to help? Who do I not have to help? Who do I have to care about? Who do I not have to care about? Because I don't want to care about everybody, so if I can get a better indication of who actually is my neighbor, then I can exclude these other people. Jesus says, well, your enemy is your neighbor, right? The Samaritans are your neighbor. And the Samaritans help this Jewish person who fell among thieves. That's the neighbor. So kind of everybody is your neighbor. The person you're standing in front of is your neighbor. So look at this story in that light. If we're asking ourselves the question, well, who are the little ones? We're kind of asking the question, who should I avoid causing to stumble to avoid having this millstone around my neck when I go swimming? Maybe it's the wrong question. Because we don't want to be asking, well, who do I have to avoid causing to stumble? But these folks over here, I can cause them to stumble. That's not what this story is about. I think we shouldn't go around looking for who we can cause to stumble. Because the word here used to stumble is the Greek word scandalon. And I'm sure you can probably figure it out. It's the word we get the word scandal from. Scandal. So this is an intentional act. This isn't like you went out there and you accidentally caused someone to stumble because you said something wrong or something like that. That's not what this is saying. This is an intentional act, not an accident. So there is no one we should go out and try to cause to stumble. That's not who we are. That's not what we're supposed to do. So the answer is, who are the little ones? Everybody. Don't go out trying to cause somebody to stumble, to cause someone to trip and fall in their faith. That's not who we are, and not what we're supposed to be doing. In fact, if we do those things, it would be considered scandalous. So we don't want to do that. And that goes as far as not just our actions, but our words too. Our words matter, especially now with social media and things like that, that we can have so much communication. We can hide behind a computer screen and say things that can cause people to stumble. We are not to be those people. Now, we can speak the truth. We can be honest, and we can give our opinion based on humility and faith, but we are not supposed to go out and cause someone intentionally to stumble. In the book The Talent Code, there's a great story of Dr. Carol Dweck of Stanford, who was studying verbal cues, the things we say to people and how they affect them. And so she had 500 fifth graders from New York City. And she divided them into two groups, so 250 each. They were given a test. After the test, and it was fairly easy to do, half of them received this phrase: you must be very smart at this. 6 words. You must be very smart at this. The other 250, got this 6-word phrase: you must have worked really hard. You must have worked really hard. Of those two groups, they then gave another test. And they had a choice. They can take a harder test, or they can take an easier test. Those who were praised for their effort, you must have worked really hard at this, took the harder test, 90% of them. 90% of them took the harder test. Those who were praised for their intelligence, you must be very smart at this, took the easy test. So again, when given a chance to take a harder or an easier test, those who were praised for their work effort took the harder test. Those who were praised for their intelligence took the easier test. Why? Well, the folks who were praised for their intelligence didn't want to look unintelligent by taking a harder test. They wanted to keep up that mojo of being smart. So then they were given a third test, which was the hardest test. They all got the same test, much, much, much harder. They asked the kids what they thought. The group who was told that you're really smart at this didn't like it at all, because it didn't make them look smart. Those who were told you're really hard at this liked the test. They got together, they challenged each other, they worked hard at it because they were praised for their work. So they saw the test as a challenge, not a statement on their intelligence, but on their work ethic. Then they went back and gave all the kids the first test that they started off with. What they found out was the kids who were praised for intelligence, you're very smart at this, saw a 20% decline in their performance. The kids who were praised for their effort saw a 30% increase in their performance. And all that's based on 6 words. It can change a person's behavior, it can change how they see themselves, it can change how they act. So it matters that we don't cause people to stumble even with our words. And when I say people, I don't mean others. That includes ourselves. Look at verse 8 in the same chapter. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and to be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out, throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into the hell of fire. Okay, same word, scandalon. If it causes you to stumble. Now, obviously, Jesus is being hyperbolic here. He's talking in hyperbole. You don't go around plucking out your eyes and cutting off your feet, because we'd all be walking around blind and we'd have a whole bunch of extra shoes we don't need. So he's not talking about those things. These are tools, right? Our hands and our feet and our eyes are tools for our mind and our heart. So are there things that cause your heart and your mind to stumble, that are scandalous, that cause you to go the wrong direction? Well, get rid of those things. It is better to deny yourself some things that cause you to stumble than to try to, quote, enjoy them, when the enjoyment might lead to your destruction. Jesus is saying that the stakes are too high to play around with things that might cause you to stumble. So we're included in the little ones. We need to take care of ourselves and look out for our own good. Are there things in your life that cause you to stumble? Well, then stop doing those things or being around those people even. And don't cause others to stumble either. Watch your words, because they make a huge difference on how people live, on how they see themselves, their self-identity. So Jesus says these things are important. How we live with each other, how we live with ourselves, makes all the difference in the world. So hope you take this as kind of an encouragement today, that take care of yourself and look forward to the things that God has in store for us as we look toward our life with Him in the future. And don't waste that by dabbling around with things that might cause us or others to stumble in the present. We'll see you next time before the day ends.